Before moving on to the next lesson, try this warm-up. Where do you see the slope, or rate of change, in each model? So by model, I mean this is one model, this is another one, this is another one, and this is another one. So I have 4 models here. Where do you see the slope in each of those? And where do you see the initial amount in each model? So think about it, pause the video, and check back in here in a minute. So this is just kind of a review of everything we've talked about with respect to slope and rate of change and initial amounts, descriptions, equations, tables of values, and graphs. They're all interconnected. So if we read the description, we see the initial amount is $25 and the rate of change is $125 per hour. We see the same thing in the equation. We see the same thing in the table of values. The initial amount is when the independent variable, the time, is 0. The cost is 25. That's the initial amount. And the slope, well, it's rise over run, or the change in y divided by the change in x. $125 for every 1 hour. We look at a graph. Well, the initial amount is the y-intercept, right there, $25. And the slope, well, it's rise over run. It goes up $125 and over 1 hour, so it's $125 per hour. So we see the slope and the initial amount in all 4 models, and you just need to be comfortable with finding them in each case. This lesson's about graphs and equations and the relationship between them. So if you have an equation, how do you make the graph? Or if you have the graph, how do you write the equation? We're going to look at both. But before we get into that, let's remember the equation of a line. We've been working with this general form for an equation of a line, y equals mx plus b. So y and x are just your variables, whatever they represent, that's what they are. M is the coefficient in front of x, and b is the constant in the equation. M represents the slope, or the rate of change, and b is the initial amount, or we'll call it the y-intercept, the value where the line intercepts the y-axis. So you can graph a line if you know its equation. Remember, the equation is written in this format. If you know the initial amount and the slope, you can draw a graph. First, plot the y-intercept. So whatever your initial amount is, plot that on the grid, and then use the slope to count rise and run to find the next point. Once you have 2 points, you can draw a line through those points. So this is pretty much exactly the same as the last lesson, except this time we're just getting our information from the equation instead of a description. So here I have 2 different equations, and I want to graph each of them. So my first equation, y equals 5 minus 2x. I have to pick out my information. What's the initial amount? What's the y-intercept? And what's the slope? Remember, the initial amount, or the y-intercept, is the constant. So this is not the constant here because it's the coefficient on the x. This is the constant, 5. It's unchanging. It's just the number 5. So that is my y-intercept, which means minus 2 is the slope. So I can plot my y-intercept of 5. That's right here. And I can use my slope of minus 2. Remember, if it's a whole number, you can just make it over 1. So it's down 2, right 1. So from my y-intercept, I go down 2, right 1, and there's my next point. And then you can continue that pattern on either side and connect the dots with a straight line, and now you're done. For my second equation, y equals 1 over 2x minus 3. What's my y-intercept? What's my initial value? Well, it's the constant, minus 3. So that's down here. And my slope is 1 over 2. So I'm going up 1 to the right 2. So from my y-intercept, up 1, right 2, I'm here. And I can continue the pattern, connect the dots, and there's my line. And if you have more than one line on the same grid, you should label them with their equations so that it's easy to tell which is which. And we can go the other way too. Now I have a line and I want to know the equation of that line. So remember, the format for the equation of a line is y equals mx plus b. M is the slope. So let's start with that. What's the slope of this line? Well, find 2 points. How about this one and this one? What's the slope? Well, it goes down 2 over 3. So my slope is negative 2 over 3. And what's my y-intercept? Well, that's where it crosses the y-axis. What's the value of y at this point? 0. So b is 0. So my equation is y equals negative 2 over 3x plus 0, but you don't really need to write plus 0 because you're adding nothing. There's nothing there. So the equation is just y equals negative 2 over 3x. And here we have one more line where we need to figure out the equation. So why don't you pause the video and try this one on your own to see if you can do it. So the y-intercept is 150. The slope, well, you just pick any 2 points. It should work out to be the slope is 5. So your equation is y equals 5x plus 150. One common issue that people have with this question is they forget to look at the scale on each of these and they just start counting squares. So some people might say, well, this is a slope of 2 over 4, which is 1 over 2. So they might get the wrong slope because they're not paying attention to the scale. So don't just count squares. Make sure you pay attention to the scale so that you get an accurate slope. Other than that, that's pretty much all you do. Find the y-intercept, find the slope, plug it in for m and b, and you have your equation. So there you have it. We can make a graph using an equation or make an equation using a graph.